So I'm going to say good morning. We just had a snowfall last night, so we've got a lot of very heavy, wet snow outside. And I took some pictures and put them up on Facebook because it was like, oh, we've had a very mild winter, really, and cold winds, yes, but the snow. So I'm not feeling guilty about sitting inside, I'll tell you. So today we're going to talk about guilt. And actually, some of you may be familiar with my book. I'm just going to put that up here, called Secrets for Living Happily. And it's, I just want to check something here. Why am it doesn't matter. I'll just keep talking and pray everything is the way it's supposed to be. This is still the learning curve, third week, etc. Now, in my first read about guilt when Secrets for Living Happily, and as the years went by, even after that, and I began to do more internal personal work, one of the things that I was surprised about was how guilt came up, how it felt. And what I discovered that guilt was black, sticky oil. And I was used to moving energy really easily. Didn't matter what people felt. I could shift it, move it around, clear it. Guilt, no, wouldn't move. Just stuck there. It's like a sticking right in. So what I began to recognize that the only thing and the only way I was able to shift that was using absolute universal love. So I had to be connected to that love in order to have the guilt element moved or removed, etc. So that became one of the interesting points that I was dealing with and wanting to work with. And so it was a very happened over time, actually, the more I began to find out about it. And then also in my past life regression work, I found at the end of the life, when we were having a look back over what the meaning of the life was and what they came to understand, what ended up happening then was that it was also to take a look at what guilt and what regret they carry. Because whatever the guilt and the regret they carry carries on into this life, carries on into we begin to then recreate in this world our belief systems, our different ways. So if we clear that in the past life regression technique, if we clear that back in that past life and then take a look in this life here and understand where exactly we were and how we are, then what will begin to happen is that you begin to feel and know and be absolutely okay. In this world, all of a sudden things can change. And the other thing I found is that, I don't know about you, but years ago I stopped watching comedies. And one of the reasons I stopped watching comedies was because the comedies ended up putting down. They were all put downs. And actually, one of the elements is to look at, are you a guilt catcher? Are you a guilt thrower? And most of us have a little bit of both. But when a person gives a put down, it's to have them feel superior. So they put you down in what they think is funny. And we as a society, I find, accept that as an acceptance of how it is or how it works. And the reality is that's not funny. And it triggers us when people say, and I was just rereading actually what I'd written so many years ago, and I said how I found out about guilt was that I was monitoring my happy feelings. So the book was all about staying happy. And I was monitoring the feeling, and every now and again I would find I wouldn't feel so happy. The whole percentage would drop. And when I began to realize that somebody would have made a funny crack or said something funny, and except it didn't feel funny to me, it felt sad. So I was very much a guilt catcher. Now, why was I a guilt catcher? It was because underneath, I had a base program that said I'm not good enough. And that's something I worked with for many years in order to feel completely much better about things. And even now, some days, sometimes people could still throw a little guilt at me and I'll go, oh, but mostly I've got that, because the key to realize is that you have two elements that what we call baseline or bottom line feelings. One is the mental equivalent, which is I'm not good enough. But the emotional equivalent is I'm unlovable. So when someone says a put down, when someone throws some form of guilt to you, what ends up happening is that you catch that and you don't feel good about who you are or what you are, and you're going to feel what is called guilty. Now, let's examine that a little bit more. What is it we're really guilty of? Because we didn't meet up to someone's expectation. We didn't come to that place where our expectation is that of how or what we do, or how and what it is going to be. So one of the things to discover is in that expectation is that if you feel really good about yourself, you begin to aware that when people say things, they're really talking about themselves. We cannot see anything on the outside that's not on our inside. I find that is something most people don't really get. Like, in other words, if you see somebody and you're very critical or judgmental about how they are, the key here is to take a look inside and feel what it is that you are inside you. How are you inside about that? Where do you hold that feeling or that action or whatever it is that you have some judgment over? Where do you have that? I did a lot of learning that way. I did a lot of learning is to see what triggered me, what upset me, and then go inside to find out what it was. What began to happen, not only as I worked at not throwing guilt, because I wasn't really a put down artist, but there were times when, it's more subtle that way. But also too, I wasn't catching it. I wasn't catching what other people, because I recognized they can only say, talk, and be what they are. And so that became a part or a whole part of where I was. And so the judgment, it's all about judgment. We judge other people, we judge ourselves, we judge a sense of who we are or what we are or where we are and how we are in relation to everything. Now, I don't usually like reading from things, but I did want to read something here from this little book, because it amazed me when I was looking at it this morning. I thought, oh my goodness me, that's interesting. I'm going to find it now here. So it's under the chapter that says 3 major internal causes for your unhappiness: worry, procrastination, guilt. And when we get to the guilt section, it says one emotion which always creates an unhappy feeling within you. You may be a guilt catcher. If a person throws a guilt statement at you, you will catch it. Feel responsible. Now, that's something that I haven't touched on yet. Attempt to justify your feelings or action with the end result of feeling a low level of happiness. It is usually taken on because you feel you're not living up to someone else's expectation. When you have someone throw a lot of guilt at you, it is just like being used as a punching bag. The guilt thrower instinctively knows your buttons, and as you get in touch with your feeling level, you will find yourself feeling bruised, like someone has taken a baseball bat to you. This happened to me at one time when I was verbally abused to the point where I was in a fetal position in the corner of a room. Not one physical thing was touched, but the next day I felt like someone had beaten me up. Because they had with words. They had literally driven me in the corner, put me down. And I remember actually being down there and got up and changed my whole stance. It was kind of like I came to and went, what? That's enough of that. But it really wasn't. We forget that words can be incredibly painful if they're taken in, and if their barrage sometimes keeps up and things like that. So I've got written down here is when you have someone throw a lot of, I just read that. Sorry about that. I first discovered how much I was a guilt catcher by observing my happy feeling. I would notice after some conversations, I would not feel very good. My happy level, very low. I would have gone from an 80% feeling happy to a 50% feeling happy. As I replayed the conversation in my mind, I discovered the person would have said some subtle put-down statements, thus advising my system I was not good enough. This is something to be aware, is the subtleties. Subtleties often we just ignore them. We just go over them. And so consequently, they kind of go in. And then this is what often we do. I then ignored my inner reaction to the feeling of not being good enough and denied I was even feeling hurt. I buried it along with all other previous feelings of not being good enough, with the end result of me not feeling happy. Now, as the time went by, I began to catch the feelings of guilt as they happened, and I began to respond differently. My first step was to stop defending myself. You might find that when somebody says something, the instinct is to defend. We want to defend and justify that this is not how we are. This is not what's happening. This is not what's going on. The second step was to state to them, when I hear that, it makes me feel guilty. And by stating my feeling, I began to take care of myself. Now, I wrote this a lot of years ago, and maybe I would be a little bit different now. Plus, the person who was throwing the guilt also became aware of what they were doing. Most people who throw guilt are not aware actually they do that, because they're coming from their need of being inferior to be superior. It's all an inferior superior game. And I think of the seesaw. And when I'm teaching this in some of my classes, I have a nice demonstration, which I don't know how to pull up yet on this. But it's like two kids on a seesaw. Young people don't know what seesaws are, but most of us, ones that have been around a while, do. To have a seesaw, you've got to be able to work together. Otherwise, one person is up in the air and one person is on the ground. Nobody is really having that balance of going up and down. Now, I'm not talking about that we throw these things back and forth. It's just a matter of knowing that you need to work together to be able to grow, because our world is about communication. Our world is about all sorts of things. When you have a poor self-image, you will react wherever you feel inferior. And usually the reaction is to throw guilt, because we want to defend. We want the world to know that we're really A-OK. And you'll need to remember the principle. We are all equal, no more, no less than anyone else. And the understanding of this principle brings about a natural respecting and honoring of each person you come in contact with. As you begin to respect and honor yourself, it will be easy to respect and honor another. I'm not going to read any more, but that I wanted to make sure I got some of those concepts in there, because people tend to think it is funny to put a person down in a comedy way, and it's not. We also need to be aware, are we a thrower or a catcher? If you're like me, who was a very sensitive, hopefully still am, but a person, and I didn't have a good self-image of who I was, I took it all on. I took the criticism. I took the judgments. I took all of that. That's why I had to come to terms to what guilt was, and how when I started to work with myself, and of course others as well, I ran into, as I said in the beginning, this black, oily, horrible energy that would not shift. Fear is easy to shift out. Believe me, you can clear fear like that. Guilt? Because it clings, it holds. And I'm sure if you think back, you've been in certain circumstances where people have said things and you didn't know why when you left the meeting, or when you left the, maybe even having coffee, then you didn't feel good. What was that? And then because it's triggered something, in you. And the key of knowing that is how you can also begin to become more aware. So it is about, first of all, identifying when you are responding, because the majority of people I know will take on guilt. They'll just take it on. They don't feel they measure up. They don't feel they could be doing better. So this self-judgment, the self-criticism becomes really strong. When we judge ourselves, we're not doing ourselves any favor. And of course, what's the counterpart of that is to learn how to love ourselves, to learn how to accept we're maybe not perfect. I mean, I'm still working on myself, for goodness sakes. Less than I used to many years ago, yes, but there are still little pieces that very often will get triggered, and I become aware of them, even though sometimes I still want to deny those. It's like, oh, thought I dealt with that. So it's like if I'm like catching it. Now, the key for me was to take a look when I threw it. When I threw guilt at somebody, and I realized that really wasn't what I did. I caught more than I threw in the beginning. And I like to think I don't really throw over a lot of things. But mine often comes from, and other people's comes from, that feeling of over responsibility, wanting to do it right. Again, if you look at that, wanting to do it right, underneath is going to be insecurity. And in the sense of being insecure, you're also going to have other things going on that you're still needing to move into more of the self-love and self-acceptance so that you can flow with that. I'm just going to check over my notes for a second here. I think I haven't talked much about not believing in yourself, but that I'll touch on that. I touched on the past life regressions and the clearing and being not good and unlovable. So this is a week when you can basically begin to check, like I did so many years ago, how am I feeling now when you have an encounter, when you go for coffee, when you're talking to someone on the phone. Phones can also do this. How do I feel when I begin, and how do I feel when I end? Are you feeling more? Are you feeling happier? Are you feeling more, you might say, supported and loved? Or are you feeling less than? Because that way you'll begin to get a handle on what is actually happening here, what is going on. And you will notice when you're catching what people are saying and taking responsibility, like they're talking about you, because it's triggering something inside. We talked about word chains last week. That's a good one to be able to identify and then go back and do a word chain on it. What was the word that triggered you, or the phraseology? What was that? How did that work? How did that come into being? And that's why these things all come together to actually have us become more and more aware of who we are and the lovingness that we have within ourselves. To know that we're loved. And part of that whole element of getting connected to the universal love energy and knowing that we're loved has helped me through many things, of knowing that no matter what, I'm loved. And it was a big awareness for me when I first really connected into that energy. And I realized that no matter what I did, no matter what I said, I was absolutely loved for me, whatever me was or who. And it was a freeing sensation at the time. And I spent a lot of years trying to figure out how I could put myself together, because I was a fragmented woman when I first was a child, up into being a woman, which is why I got into this stuff. More to do the inner transformational work, because I had that fragmentation go on within me. And as I connected, as I cleared, as I integrated, I became easier and easier for me to be able to see and know and be more confident and be more aware of who I was. So when somebody did throw guilt at me, literally, it would just disappear, it would pass, because it's not about me, it's about them. And trustingly, I do work to be able to empower people, not put them down. Now I'm going to open up for questions. So if anybody wants to ask a question, don't all try at once, but we'll see. Just unmute yourself, and I should be able to see that. I'm going to still do my little bit here of seeing everybody if I can. Hang on a minute. I'm just going. I've got to remember where I've got to go, right? I should have you all here. Okay, if you want to ask me a question, please unmute yourself, and I can see right away. and I can go from there. And I really would like some questions about anything. And doesn't necessarily have to be in relation to this. Anything? Nothing? I really, okay. Well, I do like to, I always think about, yes, Joy.
Hi. I just thought this was really interesting, and thank you for taking the time to do this. And I'm enjoying your webinars. Also, I found it interesting, all of this, because I have to really like go back home and think about if I think I have a block to guilt, because some of my friends are really, they suffer from a lot of guilt. And I've said to my husband or some of my friends, like, I don't even feel guilt. Like, it's not one of the things that I have to deal with. But I wonder, like, I like how you put it, how it's like a thrower or a catcher. Like, I guess I just am like, I'm not taking your guilt, but right. Maybe I have to just check and see if I'm making other people feel guilty, which I think I try not to, but maybe I'm doing anyway. But do you come across that with, maybe I'm just like, maybe I have guilt, but I don't let myself feel like it?
It is not something we like to look at because we don't know that there's a resolution to it. So we do tend to ignore it, and you may not feel guilt. I know when I first started doing this work, a lot of people were talking about shame. I didn't feel shame. A lot of people do. And to me, they're kind of like a brother-sister. I finally kind of had to look at it in a whole different way. What is this shame that people are feeling? Because I wasn't resonating with the word at all. And I feel that is where ultimately they really feel that they have not, there's something wrong with them. I think shame has to do with feeling wrong. And again, it's like, are we connected to that universal love force or are we not? And it's, to me, it's not about just understanding it from your head. It's about feeling it and knowing that that shame is really your take on other people. I found that very often what's happening, because those of us that are absorbers, like I've always been, we take on other people's guilt. Now, there's another component in here, is that your system cannot just release other people's energy. So their guilt, if you're taking on someone else's guilt, sexual abuse is a prime example of this, especially when you're young. You take on the perpetrators or the predator's guilt. And I've seen this over and over again where they take this on and then they can't seem to shift it or get over it. And a lot of it is because it's not their energy. And that's one of the things in the other work I do, the transformation work I do, is really to determine, is it my energy or is it somebody else's? I've asked myself that many times, and often it's not mine. And then there's ways we have of releasing that. But very often, because of certain processes people utilize, they just think we can transform everything. And that is not true, because if it's not ours, our system doesn't know what to do with that. It has no base for that. So it's about releasing that and letting that go. So just being aware of that, that's how basically we work. So don't beat yourself. Don't feel that you're beating yourself up, because if you're not putting people down, if you're not saying, if you're being supportive, if they feel guilt, it's probably their stuff. And again, that whole element, is it really theirs, or have they taken it on from someone else? Okay. Now, I thought someone else had what do you call it? Unmuted themselves. Is there? So anyway, Joy, does that answer that a little bit?
Yes, thank you for that.
It's okay. That's why I love questions, because it sparks me to go in different directions and things like that. Because I can't think of all. I've got lots of knowledge, but it's like it gets triggered when people ask questions. Why sometimes I hold evenings and just say, ask me questions, and because that's how I can give you the knowledge that you need to know and want. And that's why some of you on the email list, I keep asking, what topics do you want? I know one lady is really wanting me to talk about spiritual prosperity. And maybe next week we'll do that if nothing else comes into my mind, or if there's something else you want to look at. I'll be quite happy to do that. So does anybody else want to unmute themselves? So ask me a question, please. No? Because if not, we're going to close this up and wait until next week. I don't know about your world. My world is I'm moving this weekend. So it's a little bit chaotic, and but my intention is to be back here next Wednesday. And I just want you to remember, like guilt, throwing or catching is not a game. It hurts. It goes deep. And what we want, I see Annette, excuse me, Annette, do you have a question? It looked like
well, I don't know how this works.
Oh, just ask the question.
Oh, okay, you can hear me then.
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, I'm definitely a thrower and a catcher. So, especially as a mother, I think not so much outside of my home, but as a mother, I think I have been very much a thrower in the past when I felt that my children could be better at what they were, just to be better. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so what we will tend to do is make them feel a little less than in order for them to become more than. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work over time, because pointing out things to have them become better is one thing. Making them wrong for doing what they're doing is not always the best thing. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, it does, yes.
Yeah. And
I'm quite aware of it, and the pattern continues.
I mean, we're not perfect as parents for sure, because they don't really come with a manual. We have a lot of people giving us a lot of advice, but I think that what we do is the best we can always. But that put downy stuff, like making them wrong for this, that, or the other, is not really an effective way of achieving where we want to go. Okay? Does that answer that?
Mm-hmm.
So practice. Just know that you can just notice and pull yourself up when you go to put it down, and just explain give them a reason. I always find with the kids, if you can tell them what the outcome would be if you did it a different way, they actually respond quite well. But there again, I have to say, I'm not a child expert. Energy clearing? Yes.
Well, the children are now adults, so now the conversation has changed quite a bit. But
yeah, it does. And there's quite a thing that I talk a lot with about parents about, and then I'll do that here too now, because I say it all the time. The key with children when they grow up is to ensure that our internal picture of them equals their biological age. Because if it doesn't equal the biological age, the person that they are will feel the age that you see them inside when they either think of you or are around you. So that's where it becomes really very, very important, just to ensure that your internal picture, and all you do with that is you look inside, close your eyes, look inside, how old are they in your mind's eye. And what I find a lot, because I get a lot of people coming with problems with older children, and they're nowhere near their correct age. And then the miracles happen when they're able to update their internal picture. Everything changes energetically on the external. So it makes a huge difference. I just had someone the other day saying to me, I have told many people of that because you helped me, and I've helped others because I've shared that along. And that was because I was years and years ago, gosh, really a lot of years. I can't even calculate how many years ago. It must be 40 at least. I was in a situation, and like often happens with me, this just came into my mind, and we did this, and the difference was immediate. And ever since then, I've used it because it works. It absolutely works. In fact, my own son is now 53, I believe. And all of a sudden, not too long ago, I realized I still had him at 47, and I had to update his picture, because the difference between 47 and 53 can be quite marked because you're changing into a different decade. So I have to still keep with my son, just making sure that I've got everything updated. Same thing with my grandkids. when I see them, making sure my internal picture matches who they are now, where they are now. So it's not something we just do once. We keep doing it. We keep working with it, and it makes a sense. So I trust that will help too. And on that note, I'm going to thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to you joining me next week and other weeks that will come. And we will, and again, email me topics that you would like, because there's loads of topics, but I want to make sure that they're what you want to hear. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye now.